So, welcome to this week's Optimal Health Clinic Facebook Live. And this week we have the latest in our series of recovery stories. And this week is a particularly interesting one from my point of view for a few reasons. Firstly, it's someone that's not been a patient of the Optimal Health Clinic. It's a miracle that people do actually recover from ME chronic fatigue without being patients, obviously. And James has followed some of our bits over the years, but has a pretty amazing story in terms of his own recovery path. And to me, it's fascinating from a few points of views, partly because of just how severely he was affected at the extreme, which we'll come to, but also what James's life looks like now, the lessons and the insights that came from his own experience have had a major impact in terms of inspiring his new career path, which he's going on. I originally was put in touch with James because he reached out to us through our Facebook page and told us a little bit about his story, that he'd started a social media channel sharing healthy living recipes. And my initial response was, dare I say, James, oh, that's cute, that's sweet, that's nice. I go and have a look, thinking I'd find a page with 300 followers, to discover an Instagram account with, I think at that point, over 40,000 followers, with an enormous amount of engagement and interaction, and clearly that James was doing something that was awesome. So I reached back, and we had a great chat, and I invited James to come and share his story as part of this Facebook Live. So firstly, thank you, James, for joining us. I really appreciate you making the time.
Thanks for that lovely introduction.
You're welcome. So maybe the best starting point is to just back up a little bit before you first got ME chronic fatigue 8 and a bit years ago. You were on the path to becoming a professional golfer. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'd started golf when I was sort of 10 or 12. I was always a really energetic person, highly active, such a sporty person. And I've committed to golf from the age of 12 all the way up to 21 when I was ill. I was representing Dorset, playing national events. So highly active, so energetic, just full of energy, really. And it suddenly hit me at 21. That was when I first became ill.
And I can't remember if I mentioned this to you when we spoke before, but I also used to play golf as a teenager. I wasn't very good. I didn't even represent the local club very often. But one of the things that I remember was immensely challenging was going from being enormously active to suddenly becoming completely incapacitated. I imagine for you, even more so, because it was your kind of career path that was opening up and something you'd worked for a decade at that point. It must have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and so out of the blue as well. I mean, I was fine one day and then ill the next. So it was a real shock to me, from being so active beforehand to then the next day pretty much being bedbound from there on for 2 years. So it was a really...
Yeah, that's extremely sudden. Were there warning signs before? Like even if you look back with the benefit of hindsight, can you now see that there were, or was it really just that it was just something that kind of happened out of nowhere?
I was getting dizzy spells probably for about 2 years leading up to when I was ill. And I think you just sort of don't really think about them. And when I sort of think back, that there were those signs coming, but energy-wise and everything else, I was fine. So it was only sort of dizzy spells that would last for 15 seconds. I'd have to sit down and then I'd be okay. But no other symptoms at all.
So you then found yourself pretty much completely bedbound quite quickly, right? And that period went on for 2 years with not much change. Just talk us through a little bit about, what that was like. That must have been absolutely a horrific shock and very difficult to adjust to.
Yeah, so I went out for dinner. So the night before it happened, I went out for dinner and woke up the next morning. I was staying at a friend's and I just felt really sick. And I just went home because I just wasn't feeling great. And I was actually physically sick for about 2 weeks. It felt like food poisoning to me because I'd had it before and it just sort of felt like those symptoms. So I was being sick for a couple of weeks. And then I just sort of kept pushing myself. So I thought, I was going to be fine. And I went away on holiday with my parents about a month after I was ill, maybe 2 months. And I got back, and that was when I completely crashed. That was when I wasn't talking at all. I couldn't stand up. I wasn't eating. I just couldn't do anything. And I remember my dad had to physically carry me to the doctors, into the surgery. And that was when the doctor sort of started talking to me, and I didn't even know what he was saying. So I just said ambulance. That was the only word I could get out. And they rushed me in for a suspected brain tumor, because I wasn't communicating at all.
I mean, it's one of those experiences which I imagine on one hand was immensely traumatic, and on the other hand, it's just like you're surviving moment to moment, right? That it's hard to have much self-reflection and much looking into the future and the past. What talk us through what happened from there? I know you then went to hospital. You were in hospital for a couple of weeks. Is that right?
Yeah, I was in for 2 weeks, and I had every test you could imagine. I even had sort of lumbar punctures done, and the lumbar puncture actually failed because I just was feeling so ill. If I'd passed out and rolled over, I would have snapped the needles, so they had to stop. And then I had to, they gave me pain medication for that, and then I had an allergic reaction to that, so I was kept in for longer. So I was having severe allergic reactions to medications. One of them, pretty much, I stopped breathing on. So I had to press the buzzer and call for help, and they came and injected me to bring me back around because I just wasn't breathing.
I mean, it's also that thing, of course, where in hindsight, of course, understanding more of what was happening, but it's like it's almost the most stressful environment to be in, where suddenly there's now all this kind of panic and fear about what else might be happening. And then hospital is not restful at the best of times.
No.
But when you're in that level of severe crash of ME chronic fatigue, and one's highly sensitive to light and to sound and stimulation, I imagine that must have been extremely challenging in terms of that period.
It was literally the worst time ever. The hospital, I had 2 hospital trips. I had one later on, about 3 months after the first one, when they basically just sent me home and said they don't really know what's going on, and I needed to just go home and rest. It's probably a virus or something like that. And then the next time I came back, I was rushed in because I had an allergic reaction to antidepressants that I was taking, because at this point I just didn't know what was going on, and I was just willing to listen to the doctor and just do anything that might help me. And they were sort of saying, do you think you can be depressed? And I was like, well, maybe. It's now probably 4 to 6 months into my illness, from being so active to then being in bed in a dark room, not being able to talk, couldn't read, couldn't text, couldn't watch TV, none of that. So I thought maybe I am depressed. And to be honest, who wouldn't be, being in that type of space? So I was willing to do anything. So I took tablets, and they put me in hospital again. So I was rushed back in, and that was the time that in hospital where I was it was the worst, probably the hardest time that I've been through. I was in for 3 or 4 days, and I wasn't sleeping. Like you said, it's so bright, so much noise, so much like attention, and I just didn't want to be there. So that was probably one of the hardest 3 or 4 days I went through in the whole period.
And of course, in terms of the depression piece, if it wouldn't be unusual to be feeling depressed, but it's not that one is ill because they're depressed. It's that when you are that ill for that sustained period of time with no explanation, of course, you're going to be pissed off and fed up. I mean, that's like an entirely appropriate human response to have to that. So after you came back out of hospital that second time, so I guess we're kind of 6 months or so into the situation. What happened from there over the next 18 months? How did you, I guess the question is, how did things progress out of that period? And was there anything particular that helped, or was it really just a case of allowing your body to take the rest it needed over that period of time?
So it was about the 6-month mark when I was officially diagnosed with ME from the doctors. I think that's the sort of time period that you have to suffer with those symptoms to get that diagnosis from them.
That's
And
right.
from there,
As
I
an
was
adult, it's 6 months, and child, it's 3 months. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so I got that diagnosis, and I basically didn't really get that much support from them. They offered to see a Dorset ME clinic, which were offering me CBT, but I had to go there, and I just wasn't well enough to go there.
Right.
I still wasn't hardly able to talk at this time, let alone walk or anything like that. And it was at that point where my mum started investigating into nutrition. We had a nutritionist come out to visit me, and she would just sit on my bed and my mum would talk to her, because I still wasn't even able to talk. So she would talk to her for me, talk about my story, everything that was going on. And that was the sort of point where things slowly started to change for me. She suggested that I cut out gluten and dairy straight away. That was the two that she recommended I cut out and see if that helped. And I felt like probably my whole life I've been struggling with dairy. I just didn't really put two and two together.
Yes. And I guess at that point you were willing to do anything, right? I imagine
Yeah.
it didn't feel like a particularly big kind of impingement on your life to cut those things out, given the severity of the circumstance you found yourself in.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite happy for anyone just to say, give me some type of something to try. Really,
Right.
I was just happy to try it, and I was always quite aware of what I was eating, but it wasn't as hard as I probably thought. But obviously, I wasn't cooking. My mum was my full-time carer for those 2 years, so she had quite a hard time adjusting everything that we were eating.
Yes. How was it it must have been very difficult for your parents as well to see you in such a desperate, difficult situation. Have subsequently, have you guys spoken about how that was for them at all?
We don't, no, not much, but I think that I actually think it can be as bad for the carers as it is the sufferer, because for them, they saw someone that was pursuing a golf career, quite happy to walk 10 miles a day easily, full of energy, to someone that was completely, I thought I was dying
Yeah.
multiple times through that 2 years. I thought that was it. So for them, it must have been awful as well. And I
Yeah.
think people don't really understand how tough it can be on the carers.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of those ones where obviously for the person living the experience, it's utterly horrific.
Yeah.
And I think for those caring for them, it's easy for people to think, well, it's not as bad for them because they're not the one living it. But even if it's not as bad, it's pretty damn close watching someone, like as you described, what for your parents, watching you as someone that, yeah, I'm sure they've been very invested in supporting your golf career as well. It's like, in terms as a kid, like being ferried around to all the different competitions and things that are happening and supporting that, to suddenly observing this kind of enormous kind of shift and loss of that. So that brings us a couple of years in, and you started to make those changes. Was it an immediate? Did you notice any immediate change, or was it just, oh, that's something that you did at that time that was beginning of a much, as we'll come to, a much larger path in terms of food?
I don't really remember any quick change in anything that I've done, to be honest. It's all been a very slow process. So I started changing the diet about 6 months in, when I had that diagnosis and nutritionist. I was so scared to even take vitamin C. I would have to take such small doses. So it took me quite a long time to sort of build up in supplements as well as changing the food. But the first time I actually ever stepped outside myself was about a year after being bedbound. So I was making slow progress. An achievement for me would be get out of bed and stand up, and then it would be walk to the window, which is a few meters, then walk down to the top of the stairs, and then back, and then walk down the stairs, and then back up the stairs. So it was really, and they were happening over I would do one of them, like stand out of bed for one day, for like a minute or so, and then I would get out maybe 3 or 4 days later. So it was really, really slow. And the first time I stepped outside was a year.
And did you have any kind of outside support in terms of helping? Because in a sense, what you were doing was a very careful, gradual pacing based upon listening to your body, not based upon any kind of rigid structure. Did you have any support in that, where you were just kind of figuring out for yourself that you needed to go slowly and listen to your body in the process?
Yeah, I had the Dorset. I think I went to I had a couple of sessions with CBT, but they actually came out to see me. But to be honest, for me, it just wasn't working for me, and it was all about listening to my body. And if I didn't feel like I could do it, I wouldn't do it. And that was a really tough mindset for me, because I was always someone that would just push myself and always just so determined to be the best at anything that I could. And that's partly why sort of the blog has developed so much now, is because I have that personality.
Makes sense. Makes total sense.
So, but I had to listen to myself, and if I didn't feel like I could do it, I had to stop myself.
And I think that can take a lot of courage, right, to take that strategy. And I think particularly when, by nature you're someone that is a driven character that wants to achieve things, and it's actually a bigger achievement in that circumstance to rest and go slowly than it is to default to a kind of frustration and just go, right, I'm just going to push myself, and then spend a sustained period of time recovering from that crash. So what's the next kind of chapter of what happened from there? So you made some nutritional changes. You were gradually, through sustained rest and that kind of period of time, little bit of energy started coming back, and you started to gradually increase your activity based upon that at a very slow, careful, considered pace. What happened from there?
Yeah, so it took so the first step outside was a year. Then I would slowly, like, I could do my first sort of mini supermarket trip. And this time, this was with Louisa as well, who we started dating about 8 months in. So she's been a big part of the whole journey as well.
How did you guys meet, if you don't mind me asking, given that you were housebound at the time?
Yeah, so we actually met before I was ill, and then she heard through mutual friends that I was struggling, so she would come out and visit me, and I didn't really let anyone come and visit me. I just, especially like closer friends, because I just didn't want the sort of, especially because they knew like what I was like beforehand. I just didn't want the pressure or judgment from them. So Louisa was one of the only people that I'd let come and visit me through that time. So she would just come and sit on the end of my bed often and just talk, and I wouldn't really talk through the tough times. So she's been part of the whole journey with it as well. But at about the 1.5 year mark, that's when we sort of go into supermarkets, and even those for me were just, and coffee shops were just so noisy and really hard to deal with. So I could only do it for 10-15 minutes maximum, and then I'd have to come home again.
Interesting choice of early visits to supermarket.
Yeah, I just felt like, because it was like one of the closest things that I could kind of, it was like a Tesco Express or something.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a big one. Yeah, I'm not quite sure why I chose those really, but.
What was that because there was an early interest in food? Obviously, we'll come to that more in a bit. But what was it to do with that? I might be asking a really pointless question here. I was just curious.
I don't think it was. I think it was just. I lived in a small town, so I think it was just like one of the most sort of exciting places I could go. There wasn't really and
I guess a milestone, right? To be able to do something kind of normal, as it were, to kind of go out in that way.
Yeah.
So you were starting to kind of come up, had your interest in nutrition and food kind of started at this point, or was this predating that?
Yeah, I wasn't really there yet, because I wasn't really cooking for I wasn't cooking for myself up until the 2-year mark. That was when Louisa and I decided to take a big step and move into a flat together in Bournemouth. And she was obviously out working. So I just about felt ready that I could take on that pressure of being on my own through most of the day. but my passions will develop from being housebound. So the housebound stage was for another 3 to 4 years after the 2 years of bedbound stage.
And what did your days look like in that period? Like what? So that's obviously your energy was still very limited in terms of what you could do, but yeah, what did your days look like?
Not much different. Like I'd either be on the sofa, sat down, or laying down, or in bed. Like there wasn't that much of a difference really. I just could stand up for longer and actually cook for myself at that time. So I'd often have to cook 2 or 3 meals a day with 5 minutes of energy or 10 minutes. And I would have a chair in the kitchen as well so that I could sit down while something was cooking.
What did you find supported you at that point? I mean, it's obviously you could see you were very gradually making progress, but it must have been still a very frustrating period in terms of just, the amount of time that was passing.
Yeah, it was just such a long time. And even when I think back now, it just, everything merges into one for it, because I can't really remember day by day what happened. It was just a long slog for me. And nothing I did changed anything quickly. So it was real slow progression. And I think I just it's hard to, when you're going through something like that, it's always tough to see how much you are improving, but I was slowly, bit by bit, getting better. Like I would then be able to go out of the house and walk for 5 minutes down the road, or I could go out and I'd have to be in a wheelchair, but I could stay outdoors for an hour or something, but be in a wheelchair. So it was like the whole slow progression period.
And were you trying different treatments at all at that point? Were there a number of things that you tried, or you discovered that the thing that was working really was just taking it very slowly, one step at a time?
I'd been having Bowen therapy for probably 6 to 8 months from when the illness started. So near the same time that I started a nutritionist as well. So I'd been having Bowen therapy for the whole time, and I still have it now every month. So that was the only sort of treatment that I was having that I found helped me. But I wasn't one that tried all that much. I sort of saw what was helping me and just stuck at it. And I think some people can, whether they're ill or not, can sort of do things for not a long enough time to see benefits. I mean, I think it took me a good 2 years from being gluten and dairy free to really see much of a difference.
Yeah, I think that's often true. I think that we can live in a world where people think you get ill, you go to the doctor, you take a pill, and you feel better the next day. And some of these things, when you've got years of things not working in the right way in the body, it can take a chapter or several chapters of time for that to really start to change things in the right direction. So then are we around the point now where you started to develop your interest in nutrition and food? And if so, I'm wondering, was that a gradual thing, or do you remember a particular moment where you were like, this is something that I can do, or something that I'm interested in? Like, how did that come into the mix?
Obviously, all my time was then, all my actual energy was spent on cooking for myself. So it just developed into a passion. And before I was ill, I sort of enjoyed food, but I didn't really have any interest in it at all. I think it was just because all of my energy and focus and drive was on food, and that was what I saw was getting me better. So my focus was on helping myself. So all of it was done through food, really. And I think I just developed a passion because I was cooking so much.
And so you at this point, did you have any desire that you were going to start sharing that stuff on social media, or was it just like I'm interested in this thing and I'm kind of doing it? And yeah, like I'm wondering where that piece came into the jigsaw.
Definitely for the first sort of 3 to 4 years, 3 years of being housebound, I might post a picture on my private Instagram, absolutely terrible photos to what they are now. A little bit different, but because I didn't have a clue.
You should share a few of those for people that are interested in becoming Instagrammers. Let's just see where it started.
Yeah, because you have to start somewhere. So I was sort of
Right.
sharing some photos that, yeah, that would be classed as not great food photos now from sort of a professional. But so I'd share some of those on my private Instagram. But I didn't, it was mainly family and friends that would just say, you've got to share what's happened and where you've got. And I was so scared to do that because I've been so confined for 6 years now. Because I started the blog about 2 years ago. It took me 2.5 years ago, because it took me 6 months to put the content together, because I still was only about 50% recovered when everyone was saying that I needed to do this. So it took me a long time to build it up slowly. So I'd spend a little bit of energy every now and then putting content together, and they were just all shot off my phone for the blog as well. So I had no real idea until friends and family said I needed to share what's happened. And then I kind of just put the content out there. Once I launched it, it was August 2016, I put it out there, and it slowly started getting traction, and I've just not stopped. I've just kept going. I just sort of week by week, I've just plodded along, and I feel like I'm sort of 80 to 85% recovered now. So I've still recovered about 30 odd percent roughly in the time that I've been doing the blog, which is good because the pressure's starting to build on it now as well. So it's good that I'm still recovering.
What did it feel like when you first started putting yourself out there in a more deliberate way? So as opposed to just kind of sharing to your kind of friends and family to go, right, I'm actually gonna do this. Like, what was that like, having been at that point? I guess we're kind of 5.5 years into since you kind of first crashed, kind of living in this kind of bubble. What was it like to start putting yourself out there?
Really scary because
Yeah,
I was
sure.
someone that was always fairly private beforehand. Even before I was ill, I was quite a private sort of person. I didn't put like loads of information out about me. So yeah, it was a scary time, especially from being confined for so long. Uh, it was worrying.
Yeah, but you did it anyway.
Yeah,
So-
I sort of throughout the whole period when I was ill, the one drive that kept me going was that I was going to help other people. That was one thing I kept saying to myself: I'm going to help other people in some way. I had no idea that it was going to be food. It just turned out that way for me, and that was the sort of drive that kept me fighting a lot of the time. Was that I was going to get better and that I would help other people in some way. So it felt scary, but the right thing to do, because that was the only way that I could help a lot of people. Well, not that many at the start, obviously. I didn't have that many people following me, but that was what I felt like I was the best way for me to help people.
What were some of the key milestones at that point? So there was obviously putting yourself out there in social media was one, but as you also started to get back more energy, you were kind of 50, 60, 70% recovered. What were some of the key things, like perhaps the first time? I know it's only recently that you managed you were able to walk around the 18 holes of golf, but I think previously to that you'd go around less holes. You go in a electric kind of golf cart or whatever. But yeah, what were some of those key moments where you were like, wow, this is like I'm coming back into the world? So what was it like?
Um, I think even just going out. So the first sort of goals were to try and be able to just walk in general into a normal sort of shop, or quite a sort of powerful time really, because it really um, sort of proved that I was on the right track, that I could get out and do something again that I was already, that I was doing to a high standard before. And I've still been surprisingly good at it as well, which is always, which is
The
nice
relief
to,
after that many years.
yeah. And obviously I've been very weak because golf is quite it's demanding on your whole body. So um, my neck and shoulders have been what struggled the most, and that's why I have Bowen nowadays still, because of the pain and stuff that I get in my neck and shoulders and back. I think that's all coming from either laying on a sofa or sitting on a sofa or being in bed for that amount of time. So golf is a real test on that strength. So it's been about building that up as well for me.
And was there a kind of sense of as you were starting to do things like that again, of also that being a reminder of how many years had passed, and was that difficult, or was it just more a sense of relief that you were able to come back into the world in that way?
More relief. I don't, obviously I have to talk about my story and stuff now to potentially help other people, and it's been a big reason for why I am doing what I'm doing now. But I sort of don't, some things I just don't really remember that well. I think you just sort of block them in a way, or just move on from them. And like I said earlier, that it is just a lot of it is just a blur to me, because it was such a long period of time, but nothing really happened.
Yes. And so life was starting to kind of come back together. You're starting to play golf. You're starting to kind of put yourself out on Instagram. I know that, was it last year that then you got married? That must have been a pretty big milestone, particularly given that it sounds like your now wife, Louisa, went through the whole journey with you. It must have been the most incredible foundation for a relationship, that people say for rich or poor or sickness and in health, it's like when you start off in sickness and you get tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, so we've obviously been through it all together, pretty much from the 6 to 8 month mark. So when I was near my absolute worst, we've been through that whole journey and through all the recovery and also since starting the blog and doing that stuff. So yeah, we got married in September last year, and yeah, it was an amazing day and felt like just meant to be. It was just sort of like one of those things that was just meant to happen. So yeah, it was an amazing day, and I hate public speaking, and I managed to get through all of that as well. So,
so, and I don't know if there's anything you want to say. I think for a lot of people, going through chronic illness and maintaining relationship can also be really difficult, because you can't do the things that you can't go out freely in the way that one normally would. How was that for you guys in terms of obviously she knew that when you guys got together, that's the situation that you were in, but that doesn't change the fact that it would have still been challenging for both of you in different ways. But yeah, anything you can share about how you navigated through that together?
Yeah, and as well, that when Louisa started coming to visit me, we both didn't really know whether I was going to recover in a month's time. Like, no one really knows. Like, I could have. You don't really know if you could be fine and well again in 6 months. We thought maybe that might be possible. I don't really know. I never thought it would take 8 years to this point. I think you just sort of just plod along with it, really, and just keep each other going. And yeah, she was big support throughout the whole journey. And she's always been someone that pushes me to, not in a bad way of like pushing what I can't do, but just helping me to do the things I can do.
That's pretty awesome. And I imagine an amazing foundation to have in terms of a relationship, in terms of kind of trust and getting to know each other, and the kind of, I think the depth of connection that you get when you go through immensely difficult life experiences together. And so talk us through the last kind of 6 months, year or so, as your kind of, I guess Instagram is your kind of primary account, but I know you have other social media accounts that kind of supporting that as well. But what's that been like as you started to, I guess it's somewhat in tandem with your recovery, right? You mentioned that you're still in the kind of later stages of the recovery path, but as you're kind of recovering and that's kind of growing and that becomes its own demand in terms of energy and capacity. What's that been like? And also kind of seeing that you've resonated with a lot of people. They've wanted to follow and learn from your experience.
It's been getting tougher over the last sort of 6 months, because it's like the social media and stuff is growing fairly quickly. So I sort of like the pressure on it is building, and considering I still am not feeling like I'm falling back, that really sort of enforces that I'm getting better, like slowly getting better. For me, it's been getting tougher, but I just love to help other people, really. So it's just been pushing myself to, just keeping the content going. And it's what I love to do as well. Like I get up and I'm excited to do what I do. So yeah, it's a real passion of mine.
And I guess also that it's not just the cooking piece, right? It's also all of the kind of digital media pieces in terms of kind of the photographs and the editing and all of that. I guess you've had to teach yourself all of those pieces as well.
Yeah, so there's so much that everyone sort of sees, a food blogger, and they think, what an amazing life. And it is a good, fun life, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see. So there's a lot of like the photography, editing, social media messages, private messages, comments on posts. And when you're spread across multiple different social media platforms, it's a lot of work. So yeah, that is building, and the thing is with that, it's only going to get bigger as well, and more demands on that stuff. So I feel in the right place to sort of deal with it, though. I don't let it sort of get too over demanding for me.
So in a minute, if people want to post questions below the video, I know that when we had a bit of a technical situation with my computer crashing. I know that some people kind of got thrown off at that point. But if people do want to post questions underneath, I'll put them to James in a minute. But a few more questions from me before we come to that. So as you look back on this journey that you've been on, the journey that you're still completing and kind of finishing that kind of trajectory with, what would you say are some of the most important lessons that you've learned along the way? Like if you could go back to yourself at the start and say, right, James, these are the 3 things that you need to know that are going to help you get through the next 8 years. What would be, it doesn't have to be 3, but what would be some of those key things that you would say to yourself?
Always listen to your body knows best. If you don't feel like you can do something, it's probably, it's a tricky one, because you're always ingrained to think that if you can't do something or you find it hard, that you should just do it anyway. Sort of like feel the fear and do it anyway. And when it comes to like chronic illness, that's just not the right mindset. You have to really like listen to your body and do the things that you know that are going to be okay, and not to push. And like I said, that was a really tough thing for me, from someone that was just always wanting to be better at what I'm doing. So for me, mindset was a big change. And food has obviously had a massive impact on my lifestyle, cutting out any sort of processed food, although I do eat some occasionally. And I think that's the other thing, is that people can go too strict, and there is still, like, you still need to enjoy life and eat something that's probably not optimal at times.
Well, I think one of the things that's awesome about what you're sharing on social media is that eating healthily doesn't have to be boring. That actually what you're doing is coming up with recipes which taste amazing and are easy and quick to cook, that although you might not be having loads of sugar or kind of, things or gluten or whatever it may be, it doesn't mean that one has to ultimately go without.
Definitely. I sort of have a section of desserts that are, you shouldn't, they're healthier than what you would buy off the rack, off the shelf, but it's not something you should be eating every night type thing. But it's, what I love to cook is dinners, and that's where I feel like I'm strongest at on the blog, is sort of stews and curries and stuff like that, where you get a lot of flavour into them quickly. And all the recipes that I produce now are 10 to 15 minutes of energy, because that's how I learned to cook. So they'll either be done in that time, or they'll go in the oven or simmer, and they don't take really any more attention from you. So that's what I focus on now.
And what would you say to somebody who is in the darkest time that, like the equivalent of your really dark periods when you were, just come out of that 3 or 4 day stint in hospital, who thinks, there's no hope, there's no way out of this? What would you say to someone in that situation?
There's always hope. And this was what I struggled with when I was ill, was that I didn't feel like there was anyone for me to look up to that had been through what I had. And that was partly why I wanted to do it myself as well, was because I didn't feel like there was that person or someone that had been through the hard, that, nearly as hard as it probably gets for sufferers. I felt like that wasn't there for me. So I've basically done it myself and just realized that there is always hope, and that to listen and take in as much information as you can from other people that have been through it, and don't get dragged down by sort of the negative side of the community as well, which is out there.
And I imagine you've experienced a bit of that since you've been putting yourself out there as well, right?
Yeah, recently as well.
Right, and I think I think you and I had a little chat about this when we spoke on the phone a few weeks ago. That it's a really interesting one, because I think there are those that are out there which are very negative towards people talking about recovery, and particularly people talking about particular factors supporting recovery. So people talking about food or about psychology or about mindfulness or whatever it may be. And it's not always that easy when you're on the receiving end of that, particularly initially. I mean, I remember when my first book came out, and I had, back in those days, people wrote letters more than they wrote emails, and I had hundreds literally of letters from people, which was amazing. But then it would be the 1 or 2 people that had a negative response, and they're the ones that I ended up kind of remembering. And yet it's kind of, I think what takes courage and what's amazing is you putting yourself out there in the way that you are, and staying true to that, and honoring your story and your message. Because I think also what I really appreciate about what you're doing is you're not going out there and preaching at people. You're not making claims about things. You're sharing your experience, and you're sharing the wisdom that's come from your experience, and you're offering things to people which have the potential to help them. And one of the things that's obviously awesome about an Instagram account is it's all free for people to follow and to connect with. Anything else that you would like to share? Anything that you feel that we've missed, or anything that you feel that you want to say to people watching?
No, I think that was pretty much covered it all. Maybe sort of where I see myself going with it, maybe.
Yeah.
My passion is to get a published book deal. We spoke about that the other day.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been dreaming of happening. So hopefully that might come off in the next few years. We'll see. I'm putting myself in the right places for it to potentially happen. And I feel like that's the best way for me to get my message out to as many people as possible. Like you said, that I don't preach about anything. I just sort of share my journey and my experience, and hopefully that can help other people.
I'm not a betting man, but I would place a very large bet that we're going to be seeing a lot more of you over the coming years. I think the book will come, and I think that there's a much larger audience beyond what you're already connecting with, of not just people with ME chronic fatigue or chronic conditions, but also just people that want to live healthier, that want to connect with someone that has got a deep and true kind of narrative that's behind it. James, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself. I really appreciate your kind of openness and willingness to let me kind of pry around and ask kind of the questions. For people that want to find out more about you, we can post some links underneath the video, but do you want to say a little bit just more about your Instagram account, the kind of things you post, what people can expect from that? It's Healthy Living James is the hashtag, or the user. But yeah, say a bit more about what people can expect if they go there.
Yeah, so I post on my social media accounts every day. Nearly every day. I try to do it every day. Either be sort of a lunch or a breakfast or a dinner that I've had. And I share a new recipe on the blog, which is healthylivingjames.co.uk, every week. So that will be like a dedicated blog recipe, full written out. But the other posts that I do are just sort of inspiration, giving you quick ideas for what you could have type dishes.
And there's no particular, you're not promoting any particular kind of nutrition program. What you're promoting is healthy living, I guess, right? Simple, easy, healthy recipes with a plant-based food as being a kind of key piece of it, and yeah, making it easy and accessible for people, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I think it's not my content is not targeted at anyone really, even people that sort of have food allergies. It's just helping as many people as possible really, and even those that can eat gluten might swap some of the recipes that I make to add, and that happens a lot. A lot of the base of the dishes are plant-based, but I always say that you can add chicken or prawns or whatever you want to on top of that if that's the way that you want to eat, and that's your choice. Like I don't sort of corner myself or label myself apart from the gluten and dairy, because obviously they are the allergies that I have to stay away from. So it's kind of just open for everyone to take their own little piece out of and do what they want with it as well. And I really encourage people to not just follow the recipe as well. Maybe chuck in some other veg or do what you want with it. I like to give people an idea of what they can make and then be creative on top of that. Because I think food is all about being creative as well.
Awesome. I strongly encourage people to go and check out James's Instagram and his blog. And James, thank you so much for being so open and sharing with yourself. It's been a real pleasure. I'm really excited to follow you over the next few years and see how things evolve. Just thank you again. Really appreciate you making the time and sharing your story.
I really appreciate you having me on. And I've just seen a comment from Wayne, which is really nice as well. I don't know
you're doing a better job than I am of seeing the comments. Is it a question or just a comment?
It's just saying that they were having a tough day until watching this. So that, something like that just means a lot to me. And that's what sort of keeps me going. So
I'm just seeing it as well. That is awesome. And thank you people for your comments. And please do post questions and comments under the video. Perhaps James, you might be kind enough to pop over onto our page in the next day or two. And if people want to ask questions or connect on there, and of course they can also find you on your platforms as well. Yeah, definitely leave some comments below. I'll answer all of them. That's fine. Awesome. James, cool. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me. See you later.